I'm Isabelle Gonthier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. So welcome to this episode of the Tried and Tested podcast. I'm very happy to be here with Steve Sireci. He's a distinguished professor at University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And we're going to be talking about AI and the challenges that are faced by educational testing. I'm super happy to be here with you at the Hartford airport, pretty much. So welcome, Steve, to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Welcome to the Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts / Connecticut.
So, Steve, we always start the podcast with the same question. We want to know more about your background, your journey, what got you into psychometrics and educational assessment. What's your story?
Sure. So undergraduate, I was a psychology major. And as I was going through psychology, I thought industrial organizational psychology is what I want. That's where the money is. That's what an 18, 19-year-old is thinking about. And then as I started finishing, when I applied to graduate school, I applied to a few IO psych programs, and I didn't get in any. So I stayed at Loyola College in Baltimore, where I was, got my master's in counseling with a concentration in substance abuse because I had a scholarship there. And as I was finishing my master's degree, I applied to 2 IO psych programs, and then I came across psychometrics, and that sounded similar at Fordham University. So I applied to the 3 programs, and I only got in the psychometrics program. Exactly. So I said, well, I'll give it a shot, and I ended up really loving it. But the ironic thing about that is I think one of the reasons I didn't get an IO, my GRE scores were pretty average.
Okay.
And that might have held me back a little bit. So what do I end up doing? Going to work in the industry where the GRE is situated.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I took a couple of years of courses at Fordham in psychometrics, and then I decided to get a job. I was working on my dissertation, and I worked for the Board of Education in Newark, New Jersey, which was really eye-opening for me. It's a predominantly minoritized school district. And my boss there at the time was like, I was really focused on statistics. He was like, you should go into measurement because there's a lot more opportunity. So that's after I worked there for a year. The next summer I went to ETS as a graduate student fellow.
A lot of paths start at ETS. I love that.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I was working with Howard Weiner, who was and still is one of the big names in the field.
Yeah,
and he was a great mentor. And that summer, the Psychometric Society had their meeting in Princeton because Paul Holland was at ETS. He was the president. So everybody in psychometrics was passing through, and I was a grad student working the registration table. So I met everybody, and it was great. And after that, I worked for the CPA exam in New York for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then I went to GED testing service in Washington, D.C., American Council on Education, for 3 years. And then I came to UMass, and I'll just say that was more than 5 years ago.
You'll leave it at that.
Yes, because the real number is complicated math, and we don't want to have to integrate functions and that sort of thing.
No need for that. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. So it's kind of interesting to see, how your journey, most of our guests, they didn't necessarily envision coming into psychometrics or testing or assessment. It kind of through different pathways, they got there. So it's kind of interesting to see, although IO, obviously you're interested in IO and the interconnections are there, like from psychometrics, IO and measurement and all of this is interconnected.
Yeah, the common theme is trying to measure things about people you can't see, and that's hard. So if you like problem solving, psychometrics is a great field.
Yeah, absolutely. So leveraging your academic role in research, you've worked at the intersection of certification, product strategy, workforce skills, in fast-moving technology environments. So given everything we've been hearing in the industry about lifelong learning, the evolving workforce needs, and the need for more dynamic credentials, what has shaped your perspective on where credentialing needs to go next? Or assessment? It doesn't have to be just purely credentialing, but where do we need to go next?
Yeah, I think of assessment more broadly. It's exciting in that assessments have been used for most of my career as measuring what someone has learned, oftentimes as the thing you have to get through to get to the next stage, whether it's college or graduate school or a certificate or a license or something like that. And what we're seeing now is assessments being used actually to help people learn. So the whole assessments for learning, I know that that's older, but now we're really seeing the power of assessment as a tool for learning. And that's kind of exciting because it opens up not just a whole new area of application, but if you want to help people, that using tests to actually help people is just very different. Like most people, when they think of tests, they don't think about that. But now we're seeing it. Assessments in the service of learning. The handbook for assessment in the service of learning just came out last October. Edmund Gordon, who you might know, kind of championed that effort. And those handbooks, which are free and openly available for everybody, talk about things like game-based assessment and how self-regulated learning, using tests for people to learn on their own, and that's exciting. That development and culturally responsive assessment, which is, if you take culturally responsive assessment, which is like, let's not try and think one form is going to be okay for everybody, and personalized assessment.
Yeah.
That's also exciting because, for most of my career, it's been let's develop the best test we can for everybody. And in many cases, that's one form or a couple of forms that are equated. And now we're thinking, can we develop the best test for each individual person in real time?
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet, but that's kind of like the vision. And in the certification industry, I think there's always going to be constraints. It's not like the ideally theoretically the best possible test we're not going to be able to do. But what's the best test we can give somebody given the constraints of what's in the item bank, given the constraints of test security, and in the context of certification, given the constraints of what it is that we need to protect the public, that we need to make sure that the knowledge and skills we're measuring. Content validity is always going to be, foundational and important. But I think there's a lot more than we can do now with technology than we've been doing, in the idea of having a couple of test forms.
Yeah, and I think that's the opportunity that we're seeing. And you said it. I think the customization or personalization of assessments with technology now, like there's with AI and the way it can sort of like adapt and evolve and build assessments on the fly way more easily than what we've been seeing. Obviously, we need to make sure that there's a certain level of equivalency and all of that. But I think we're sort of opening up that kind of structured, very constrained and rigid approach to from a standardized standpoint to more like adapting to evaluate where people are at, what their skill sets are, and then adapting back to the whole concept of the workforce needs.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is that there's one thing of establishing where people are at, but are they workforce ready? Are they ready to perform in the job? Are they ready? Do they have the skill sets? And how do we continue to build those skill sets?
And we can't really think of a skill set as like one thing, because people accomplish different goals on the job, different tasks in different ways.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you said like opening up, we almost have to unlearn a lot of what we learned about standardization. One of the things I like to talk about is, first of all, what does standardization mean, right? Same content, same testing conditions, same scoring.
Yeah.
And for most of what I learned and most of my career, again, we really need to stay true to standardization. Like everything has to be the same for everybody and then you think, because why? It depends on the purpose of the test. Like if I want to use assessments to help you learn, then maybe
it's a different story.
We can have a lot of variability.
Yeah.
But the history of psychology, when psychometrics emerged, proving that we can measure something about the mind, proving we can measure these latent, unobservable abilities, was what was really important to justify psychology as a science. So this idea of keeping everything standardized, like we do in experimental psychology, right? Make sure the reinforcement's there and nothing else.
You put all of the parameters,
And that really held for 100 years. And now it's like, wait, what's the purpose of the assessment? And making some of these standardization conditions more flexible actually increases validity, as opposed to making sure we've got the same thing for everybody, because then we know we're not measuring some people very well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think building from that, as we think about how like technology and AI is opening up the opportunities that we have in front of us, there's also some challenges associated with that. So where do you see the most opportunities, but where do we also have to be careful in jumping in like too quickly?
Absolutely. Yeah, really good points. Opportunities. We have a new employee. We've got this new employee who's reliable. He's going to,
Hmm.
or she going to try and do the best job they can of what you're asking them to do. So I see AI as the new tool. Um, I I think where people run into trouble is if they don't really interrogate the output, evaluate what it's doing. But people like, well, what do you use AI for? For everything, right? It's like
Hmm.
it's the new calculator, it's the new tool.
Yeah, it's supporting us in everything we do almost. Yeah, which is a little scary at times, but also extremely efficient.
I downloaded some data the other night, and it wasn't in the format that I could use for
Hmm.
statistical analysis. And normally I'd have to wait till the next day to ask a grad student to do some programming for me because programming is really not what I do anymore. I was like, I wonder if Chad could reformat this for reshape the data. 5 minutes later, I had the data in the format I wanted. Well, actually, it made a mistake, so I had to look at what it gave me. I was like, all right, I said this, not that, and then, but still, it was like 5 minutes before I had the data for it.
Wow, the efficiencies that it actually builds to be able to help you do your work,
Yeah,
not have to wait for
yeah,
additional people. But you said something also important is that you've identified a mistake that kind of could have led into like a direction that would have
exactly,
created a lot of
exactly.
issues. So you have to verify, validate.
And that's why the skills we're teaching psychometricians are going to be so important
Hmm.
because what do people, we need to, figure out what's inside the black box of AI. So we are trained for that, right? We've been talking about measuring unobservable things and figuring out what the numbers mean. So I think the skills that we're teaching our graduate students at UMass and more broadly in the field is how do we properly use AI? And a lot of that involves interrogating, um, getting, how do I want to say this? Being able to explain what it's giving you and what it's using to give you that information.
Yeah,
So if you're the people who are just going to use AI and not interrogate it are not the critical thinkers that we need. So the
exactly.
critical thinking becomes even more important, and that's I think what psychometrics is all about.
Yeah. No, and I think that's kind of, again, that's how it will also need to evolve in terms of how it's being taught, how it's being applied, and the skill set that we're going to be looking for the psychometricians. It's not about the data analysis piece of it. It's about the interpretation, the analytics in a way where understanding what it all means and driving the programs,
That's right.
basically.
That's
So,
right. We've often talked about validity of the interpretation and use of a test score.
mhm.
But now it's what's the validity of these different aspects that we're using AI for,
Yeah.
right? So if you're using AI for scoring, what's the validity of that scoring? If you're using AI for alignment, like aligning
Yeah.
tests to standards, what's the validity of those alignment results and so forth? So humans, I don't think are ever going to be out of the loop,
Hmm.
but I think how do we audit the AI in a way that makes sense so that we can leverage the efficiency and productivity that it gives us at the same time we minimize hallucinations or results that are not going to be very helpful.
Yeah. And you're speaking about validity. And I think that there's kind of elements there that are interesting to think about as we think about the role of AI, how it changes how tests are developed, delivered, scored, interpreted. And it potentially challenges the traditional view from a validity standpoint in terms of how we collect evidence. So, how do you see that evolving? Like, what's the potential impact in how we've been traditionally thinking or confirming or adhering to those validity elements, statements?
I like, I like the five sources of validity evidence from the Standards for Educational
Hmm.
Psychological Testing because I think it gives us a framework for thinking about, is there new evidence or where does any new evidence fit in? Um, but as being part of the revision of the standards, it's quite likely there's going to be a sixth evidence, which has to do with a sixth source of evidence, are users interpreting the results correctly.
Hmm.
Um, but as I walk through that, so validity evidence based on test content, I think most of that evidence is judgmental. right? So we write some items, we target it towards the knowledge and skills on the job,
Yeah.
and then we bring in some subject matter experts to evaluate that. I think that's still going to be important. Some of that content might be AI generated or AI human collaboration generated. Having AI as another expert to evaluate it, I think is also useful. So we did some work where we did some alignments with some of the test items we developed. They're measuring college and career readiness standards for adults. So that's what they're targeted to. But we wanted to also align them with the ONET kind of skills.
Yeah.
So we had chat find some job tasks and detailed work activities associated with these items. But then we had Claude evaluate those matches and some human experts evaluate those matches. And Claude was about the same as the human judgments. I mean, not perfect, but the agreement of Claude with the humans was about the same as the humans to each other. So it's funny, like we want humans to interrogate the AI results, but we
Yeah.
could also use other AI engines as
To-
part of that interrogation too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the opportunities are fun. And the last thing I'll say before we end this track is I feel like I can't retire because I can redo everything I've done up to this point in my career using AI and just double the length of my vita.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I
Yeah,
like that.
I mean, standard setting, we can use
Yeah.
AI for that. Or we can experiment with that.
Yeah.
Alignment, item calibrations. It just the list just goes on. What are the steps in test development? What are the steps in testing? AI has a role in everything.
Oh, absolutely. It has a role to play. And then again, it builds the efficiencies, but it also kind of like forces us to rethink how we're doing things. And now a short break. Hello, tried and tested listeners and fellow testing enthusiasts. I'm Isabelle Gonthier, your guide through the fascinating world of credentialing. Each week, we dive deep with expert guests to explore the hottest topics in certification and licensure testing. If you're enjoying our journey through lifelong learning and innovation, take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you know someone passionate about testing or curious about the latest testing trends, why not share this podcast with them? It might just be the inspiration they need. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Remember, sharing knowledge is one of the best ways to grow our industry together. Keep listening. When we think about how the individuals, the test takers, the candidates are actually using AI in preparing for specific assessments in their learning process, in how they do their job, how is that changing, like in terms of what we are measuring in the end? Because AI doesn't just impact the assessment process, it impacts what leads to what needs to be measured.
I think that's a question I want to ask you. I'd be interested in your answer to that. But one of the things I think about is what is the construct that we're measuring? What are the knowledge and skills we're measuring? And as we evolve into the 21st century, part of that is going to be the proficiency of the candidate to interact with AI and use it. So if you wanted me to solve some complicated math program, well, I'm going to use AI to help solve that. Is that okay or is that not okay? Are you trying to measure my calculation or are you trying to measure my problem solving? So I think in some cases, the allowing test takers to use AI might be okay. But then there's everything we learned at COTS about people using AI for cheating and so forth. So if someone doesn't know the answer and is using AI to forge that they actually know the answer, that's a problem. And I am a fan of a lot of like Dave Foster and his work about and others in generating lots of variations of items so that it's hard, you can't memorize everything. But the ability for test takers to access AI while they're taking an exam in a way that's unobservable to a proctor is a real problem.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the two sides of it. There's like leveraging AI to provide an unfair advantage that will lead to people measuring something different than what is intended to be measured. But there's also, when you flip it in terms of how is it going to impact how we're defining, if we think of credentialing, licensure, certification, how we're defining the job that needs to be done and how it's going to be done, what tools are going to be used to do the job. That's also changing
That's right.
that construct,
Yeah.
because that's an additional tool that wasn't there before, that's now part of the ecosystem. How is it evolving? How you define the skills, knowledge, and abilities on the job is also going to be really interesting to think about that impact as well.
That's right. Yeah. So if you want to hire people who know Python for programming, for example, you might be able to hire people who don't know Python but can use Chat or Claude or whatever to create Python code that will actually work.
Yeah, yeah. And again, the way then it's not about the use of Python that is as important, but it's how you are leveraging, interpreting the results, and then sort of like leading and feeding into the next steps of the process.
Yeah, your point about what's the construct and what are the knowledge and skills we want to measure, that remains important. And the world is changing, so interacting with AI is becoming more a part of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of shifting a little bit, when we think about AI, the opportunities that it creates, how does that impact when we think about aspects around cultural aspects, language assessment, how it's facilitating this, from a language learning standpoint, a language assessment standpoint, but how are we protecting ourselves from we're not going in a direction where we're not able to truly assess the level of proficiency that is required for establishing a language level for immigration, or to be able to make sure that you can function in a graduate program, for instance. So how do we sort of again, it's back to that question: how do we leverage AI to assist in the learning process, but how do we also make sure that it doesn't create, from a cultural and contextual aspect, any issues with the validity of the observations or the scores that we get from a proficiency standpoint, if that makes sense. It was a little convoluted. I apologize.
Well, I think you hit a lot of different points.
Yeah.
So let me just start, and maybe we'll
unpack that a bit.
AI is good at some things and it's not good at other things. And I think figuring that out is going to continue to be something we need to do. It's really good at translation, right? So if you want to be able to have different language versions of tests, I mean, still you have to proof it and so forth. But if you want to allow examinees to access their native language during a test and use AI in that way, like, I don't understand these directions, can I have them translated? Why not?
That's a great tool.
So it's a great tool, and some certification programs are doing that. If you tell AI, give me a reading passage at this level and make it culturally responsive, it's going to be terrible. If you say something like, make this reading passage appropriate for Mexican Americans, it's going to give you very stereotypical things about eating tacos and that sort of thing. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to figure out what are the right prompting strategies to build some things in, like supporting funds of knowledge to build in cultural relevance and so forth. And what we've had some success with, Javier Suarez Alvarez, one of my colleagues at UMass, is the idea of developing avatars that represent some of the diversity within your test taker population.
Okay.
And then inputting the avatar, and so Chin Fen is a single mom who's immigrated from Malaysia and raising, 3 kids, and she's got a part-time job, blah blah blah. And you tell Chat that, and now give us a passage that's relevant to this
that
person.
Context.
And I think seems to be helping a little bit. And part of the problem is, I think a lot of what AI is fed on, it's been very, kind of dominant culture. So that's what we have to worry about. And I think as we interact with AI, as we use it more, we need to make sure there are representatives from more historically minoritized people in the room, helping us interrogate that and helping us to understand the quality of the output that we're getting.
And that validation piece is really critical to understand and be able to then, that whole feedback loop is critical in terms of redirecting, adapting, and making sure it's representative in the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that just occurred to me, Isabelle. conferences are becoming more important because people are trying out these different things. And if you want to know what seems to be working, what not seems to be working, you're seeing that at conferences. So like, ITC, International Test Commission,
Yeah.
we mentioned LRTC, the NCME's Artificial Intelligence Conference and so forth. I think really have become much more interesting because people are in real time kind of sharing what's been working with their applications of AI.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point because there's a lot of people experimenting in different ways in application in terms of like those credentialing examinations or language assessments or educational assessments in from a testing organization standpoint. There's also the research aspect and how it kind of all interconnects and be able to sort of like go at the application level or more fundamental and connect those dots and being able to hear about what's being done is really important. And I think that point is really critical, and we need to continue to do more of that and have that interconnection between research and the testing organizations and in the credentialing organizations. They need to understand that. And I don't think it's interesting because I feel like as I look at the conferences, the different conferences that are out there, there's some conferences that not allow, but there's more opportunities for intermingling the various worlds, and other conferences not as much. So how do we bridge that gap? So I think about, for instance, NCME is a little bit more research oriented, but at the same time, I've seen more and more of the applied aspect being presented, program coming in and talking about what they're doing and connecting it back to the research. So how do we do more of that? Because I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, I agree. And NCB is a good example because it is smaller, maybe 1,000 people. And then there are these, like, for lack of a better word, spin-off conferences. So NCME now is the Artificial Intelligence Conference that this will be the second one coming up this year. International Test Commission, again, that's 500, 600 people. It's the smaller and more intimate spaces. But the application and the emergence of AI has been very empowering for universities because we kind of, and the big testing companies have been using it for a longer period of time. But it brought us up to speed really quickly. So when you see the presentations, we're there with PSI, and what UMass is doing is not that different than what ETS is doing, and so forth. So it's kind of like put us all on a playing field. So the conferences that have the more opportunities for intimate conversations, hallway conversations, that sort of thing, I think have been particularly helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that also as we connect the role of, speaking of AI in terms of like all aspects of how we measure, how we secure assessments, the threat associated with that, and all around.
We should mention COTS. The Conference on Test Security is a great one for those issues.
It's a great one because it all goes back to protecting the integrity of the program of the assessment to, in the end, protect the integrity of the score and the results that's provided, so we can really attest to the ability of the person and not, from an unfair advantage. It's really, I really appreciate that conversation. And I think I'm kind of looking at the time and I feel like we can unpack so many more topics here. But when you think about where we're going, like in terms of from an educational testing and certification testing, the role of AI, the role of technology, what is going to be defining where we're going next, basically?
Yeah, and you keep trying to get me to talk more about certification testing. I'm sorry.
No, and then we don't have to.
I think it's like, tests are very good about saying what someone can do at a particular point in time. So that becomes really important from a certification perspective. Part of the undermining of the American university system, not to get too political, but clearly there's an effort to undermine the American university system, is that you don't have to go to college. You can get certified in a trade. So then the role of testing to confirm that becomes more important. If you back up a little bit, there's the workforce Pell Grant now. So there's actually money that traditionally would have been for more traditional like college Pell Grant can now be used for training programs. But people still need to demonstrate what we used to call ability to benefit. right?
Okay.
So that you'll benefit from this training program. So I think there'll be more like micro certifications and badging. You're seeing that already. So I think the political climate is going to be supportive of the idea of micro credentialing and badging, and I think we should be ready not just for the badging and the credentialing, but for using assessments to support learners along the way to achieving those goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you said it, micro-credential, I think has been gaining a lot of traction lately as we think about it. And then the whole concept, it also links back to the whole concept of lifelong learning, being able to demonstrate what you've accomplished along the way, but always sort of like continuing learning. It's not a one point in time determination of where you're at. It's kind of an evolution over time.
You reminded me of something, if I can squeeze this in quickly. I was involved in a presentation on micro-credentialing a few years ago, and I had the thought, this idea of micro-credentialing is actually extending what we used to call gifted and talented down to the level that everybody can be gifted and talented in something. And we can actually confirm that by issuing a badge or a micro-credential.
Wow. No, that's an interesting concept. Yeah. Wow.
Everyone is gifted and talented. It's just like in what?
In what? Yeah, exactly. Where and on what? And it's good because then they can like being able to say, attest and demonstrate, I've accomplished this. I can showcase this. I have the ability here that makes me different, unique, and then can prove that serving as proof points for potential employment or continuing education, basically.
And the challenge for the testing industry is how do we develop and administer the tests in a way that enable people to actually show those skills?
Yeah, collecting the evidence and how do you kind of aggregate that evidence in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Well, that's been an amazing conversation. What would you say, like, as we think about wrapping up this great conversation, if you had one piece of advice to provide to organizations out there, testing professionals, assessment professional out there, as we think about how quickly things are evolving, transforming, like, and we're in very much of a transformative era in so many ways. As you kind of think about where we're heading, what would be a piece of advice?
Well, for organizations, definitely they should engage with UMass and support some of our doctoral students.
There you go. I love that.
But more seriously, I think some things are foundational and don't change. So the foundational concepts of reliability, validity, and fairness, right? I think how we want to approach them, document them, research them might change a little bit, but still we want to make sure that what we're saying about a person, or if it's an aggregate test score about a school or a district or whatever, there's evidence to support those claims. And it really requires us to do research. And I think, a lot of the activity and the money in testing goes into getting the tests out, developing really good tests and getting them out there. And I think we can't forget that the research is also important. Validity research is really what's going to save us as a profession.
Yeah, the foundational elements of measurement are still critical and important, and we need to link it back together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, thank you, Steve, for taking the time, and then we'll keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Isabelle. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tried and Tested, brought to you by PSI and ETS. We hope today's discussions gave you valuable insights into the world of testing and assessment. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes featuring experts and innovators across the assessment industry. New episodes are released every other Thursday. We hope you tune in next time to Tried and Tested. Keep listening.